I never thought I'd end up sitting across from my own father in a courtroom, watching him look me dead in the eyes and demand that every dollar I had ever earned belonged to him. But there I was, gripping the edge of the wooden table, my palms slick with sweat, as my dad, the man who taught me to tie my shoes, the man who used to say family first, tried to legally strip me of everything I'd built when he said, I deserve half your fortune because you wouldn't have had anything without me. Something in me snapped. I turned to the judge and said one sentence that made the entire courtroom fall silent. Even the judge went pale. And my dad, he didn't say another word. Tell me, would you have done what I did if your own father tried to destroy you out of greed? To understand how it got to that moment, I have to take you back to where it all started. I grew up in a small town where money was tight, and my dad, Frank, was the kind of man who believed respect had to be earned through fear. He was never outright abusive, but his words were sharp, sharper than any belt. You're nothing without me, he used to say whenever I tried to make something of myself. My mom, Laura, was the quiet one. She'd just stand in the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel, pretending not to hear when he belittled me. When I was 15, I started working odd jobs, mowing lawns, fixing computers, washing cars. I didn't have much, but every coin I earned made me feel like I was building something for myself, something he couldn't take away. But my dad had this obsession with control. If I bought new clothes, he'd ask, whose money did you use, as if I'd stolen it from him. If I mentioned college, he'd laugh and say, you think you're better than me, you'll come crawling back one day. I remember the night I decided to leave. I was 18, standing outside the house with my duffel bag. My mom hugged me and whispered, don't let him break you. My dad didn't even look at me. He just said, go ahead, see how far you get without me. I left and never looked back. I worked through college, got scholarships, and eventually started a small tech company with two of my closest friends. We built software that helped small businesses manage their inventory and finances. It started small, just a few clients, but within 5 years, it blew up. We landed contracts with national chains, and suddenly, I was a millionaire. It didn't even feel real. I bought my mom a house in her name, not mine, not ours, just hers, but I didn't tell my dad. I didn't owe him that. Then, out of nowhere, he called me. It had been almost a decade since we'd spoken. His voice on the phone was shaky, fake sweet. Son, it's your old man. I heard you're doing well. Maybe we can talk. I should have hung up, but part of me still wanted to believe that maybe he'd changed. So I agreed to meet him. He showed up at a fancy restaurant, not a diner, not a coffee shop, a place that screamed show off. He was dressed in an expensive suit, probably rented, and when I sat down, he didn't even ask how I was. He just smiled and said, you made it big, huh? Must be nice. I told him I worked hard for it. He leaned forward and said, you remember everything I taught you, how to be tough, how to survive. You owe me for that. I laughed, I couldn't help it, but his face twisted. I'm serious, he said. You wouldn't have anything if I hadn't raised you. I gave you life. You think you did all this alone. That's when I realized why he'd really called. He wanted money. I told him no. I even offered to help him get a job at one of the businesses I worked with. But he didn't want a job. He wanted my success. 2 weeks later, I got a court summons. My father was suing me, his claim that I had used family resources to start my business and that I owed him financial compensation. I couldn't believe it. My own father had filed a lawsuit against me for being successful. My lawyer even thought it was a prank at first. But no, it was real. He'd hired an attorney and filed the paperwork. He demanded a settlement of $3 million. I showed up to court that first day feeling like I was in some twisted dream. My dad sat across from me, arms crossed, acting like I was the villain. His lawyer started reading out this ridiculous list of contributions, things like providing housing during childhood and life guidance. At one point, they even said the father's emotional influence directly contributed to the son's success. The judge raised an eyebrow. I wanted to laugh, but mostly I just felt hollow. How could he do this to me? When it was my turn to speak, I didn't hold back. I told the court everything: how he had mocked me for dreaming bigger, how he kicked me out, how he never supported a single step of my journey. I presented proof: my college loans, my pay stubs, my business records. I even brought in testimony from my mom, who, to my surprise, agreed to take the stand. She told the judge in a trembling voice he never supported our son, he only tore him down. My dad glared at her like she'd just betrayed him, but she didn't flinch. That was the moment I saw her strength, the strength she'd hidden for years. Still, my dad's lawyer kept pushing. Surely family influence has value, he said. If the father provided emotional and moral support during the formative years, that is worth compensation. The judge looked unimpressed, but she didn't say anything. Then came the part that made my blood boil. My dad stood up, pointed at me, and said, "He owes me because he's my son. That's how it works. Everything he owns started with me." I could feel everyone's eyes on me, the audience, the reporters, even the bailiff, waiting for me to explode. But instead, I took a deep breath and said the one thing that shut the whole room down. I looked straight at the judge and said, "If my father deserves my money because he gave me life, then he should also pay me for the pain, the fear, and the years I spent thinking I wasn't good enough because of him. If we're putting a price on parenthood, then let's make it fair both ways." The judge's face went pale. My dad's jaw dropped. The courtroom went silent, so quiet you could hear the hum of the ceiling lights. The judge asked me to continue, and I did. I told her how he used to tell me I was worthless, how he threw my acceptance letter in the trash, how he refused to come to my graduation. I told her how he'd told my mom that investing in my education was a waste. That's the support he gave me. I said, "So if he thinks he deserves a share of what I've built, then I demand emotional restitution for every scar he left on me." You could see the color drain from his face. He tried to stand, but his lawyer pulled him back down. The judge called for a recess. My dad avoided looking at me, just staring down at his hands. When we reconvened, his lawyer whispered something to him. He looked defeated. The judge finally said, "This case has no legal merit. The court cannot award compensation for moral influence, especially when there is no evidence of financial contribution." Then she looked at me and added softly, "But I commend you for speaking your truth." That should have been the end of it. But my dad couldn't leave quietly. Outside the courthouse, in front of reporters, he started shouting, calling me an ungrateful brat, saying I'd ruined his reputation. Cameras flashed as he screamed, "You'll regret this." I didn't respond. I just walked away. But a few days later, I decided that if he wanted to play dirty, I'd show him what real consequences looked like. You see, what my dad didn't know was that while preparing for the lawsuit, my lawyer and I had uncovered some interesting information. My dad had been collecting government assistance for years, claiming disability, unemployment, and even a veteran's pension he wasn't entitled to. He'd lied on his forms, saying he had no family to support him. My lawyer handed me the files and said, "You could turn this over to the authorities. It's fraud." I hesitated at first. Reporting him would destroy him financially, maybe even get him arrested. But then I remembered his words in court. "Everything you own started with me." No, everything I had started when I left him behind. So I made the call. 2 months later, he was under investigation. His accounts were frozen, and he was ordered to repay thousands in fraudulent benefits. He tried calling me, leaving angry voicemails. "You did this. You're ruining your own blood." But I didn't respond. I'd spent too many years giving him power over my emotions. It was time to take that back. My mom called me one night crying. "He's lost everything," she said. I could hear the guilt in her voice. I told her, "He did that to himself." She paused, then said quietly, "I know. I just wish he'd realized it before it was too late." And here's where I'll stop for a second and ask you, what would you have done? Would you have let it go and walked away? Or would you have made sure he faced the consequences? Because that's where I was standing at a crossroads between mercy and justice. Before I tell you how it all ended, I want you to think about it. If someone, even a parent, tried to destroy everything you built, would you forgive them? Or would you make them face the truth of their actions? Let me know what you'd do in my shoes. Now, back to what happened next. After the investigation, my dad disappeared from the public eye. The house he lived in was repossessed, his car was gone, and he moved into a small apartment paid for by a friend. Months passed, and then one day I got a letter in the mail. It wasn't typed, it was handwritten. I recognized the shaky handwriting immediately. It was from him, it said. I never thought you'd turn against me. You humiliated me. You'll always regret this. No apology. No reflection, just more blame. I burned the letter. But life has a strange way of balancing things. About a year later, I got a call from a local hospital. My dad had suffered a stroke. He was alive, but paralyzed on one side. They said he didn't have anyone listed as emergency contact except me. I stared at the phone for a long time. Part of me wanted to hang up, but another part, the one my mom had raised, told me to go, so I went. When I walked into that hospital room, I barely recognized him. The once proud, loud man was frail and quiet. His eyes darted toward me, full of anger and shame. I sat down, and for the first time, I saw fear in his face, not the kind that comes from losing money or pride, but the kind that comes from being truly alone. He tried to speak, but the words came out slurred. I could only make out, "Why me?" I said, "Because you chose this path, you pushed everyone away." He started crying actual tears. I hadn't seen that since I was a child. I stood up and said, "You taught me how to be tough, but you never taught me how to love you. That's on you." Then I left. That was the last time I saw him alive. When he died, there wasn't much to settle. No property, no money. Just a box of old things, photos, letters, and a dusty baseball glove. He used to play catch with me when I was little. I kept that glove not because I forgave him, but because it reminded me that once, before the bitterness, before the greed, there was a moment when he was just my dad. And maybe, in his own broken way, he thought he was teaching me strength. In the end, his death didn't bring me peace, but it did bring closure. I used part of my fortune to start a scholarship for kids from broken homes, kids like me who needed a chance to prove that where you come from doesn't define who you become. My mom helps run it now. Every year, we meet students who remind me why I fought so hard to build something that was truly mine. So, was I wrong for what I did? Maybe some people will say yes, that I should have forgiven him, that revenge doesn't heal. But for me, it wasn't revenge, it was justice. It was standing up to the man who spent his life trying to make me feel small and finally saying, "You don't control me anymore." If you were in my place, would you have done the same? Would you have let him walk away after suing you? Or would you have made sure he faced the consequences of his greed? Let me know in the comments below. Like this video if you think I was right to stand my ground. Subscribe for more real stories like this, where truth, betrayal, and justice collide. And remember, sometimes walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the most powerful thing you can do. I'll see you all in the next story.